world surrounded by franchises, reboots, and shared universes. An elite team of podcasters will risk body and soul to investigate the depths of intellectual properties, one multiverse, subgenre, and trend at a time. Who are we? We're the IP Squad.
Welcome back to the IP Squad and our ongoing investigations, the Alien and Predator franchises, and also the Prometheus franchise, I guess, that was meant to kick off from this. Anyway.
John,
yes,
we have found our creators, and we have asked them most important questions we can, like, should I touch this thing? Or what if I breathed in some of this goo here?
Yes, folks, that tone can only mean we're talking about one movie, and that's what year is this? Prometheus is
2012.
Okay, 2012. 2012's much anticipated. I was psyched for this movie. I should mention I'm John Campbell. The other voice you hear, Mike Ergoni.
Oh yeah, that's me.
Yeah, I think we both were really excited for this. If you were a sci-fi nerd in 2012, and you heard Ridley Scott is coming back. The original, not creator, but like auteur that defined so much of this franchise we love. A franchise that had really been, I think that was the thing was like, we can only improve. And he does,
in theory.
He does in some ways. I mean, this is better than Alien 3 and Resurrection in some ways. It's a very pretty movie. It's a gorgeous looking movie.
Yes, and there are practical effects done in this movie that are incredibly impressive.
Yeah.
But there is a certain amount of bad writing that does not a good movie make.
This is a perfect example of I can't believe this many super talented people came together to make something this stupid.
It's like they canceled each other out.
Yeah. Because, like, you're watching it, you're going like, well, you've got Ridley Scott at the helm. You've got two screenwriters who I respect immensely, who have both written other much better science fiction, right? Because you've got Damon Lindelof and John Spaihts. People probably familiar with Lindelof, creator Lost and Watchmen and Leftovers, things like that. But John Spaihts, he's having quite the moment, having written the two Dune movies.
Yeah. I mean, he also wrote, or at least has a credit on the first Doctor Strange movie. Very good.
Yep.
Less good, though, he did write the movie Passengers and that screen story for the Mummy movie with Tom Cruise.
Screen story takes him off the hook, which implies he did.
Fine, fair enough.
And Passengers is a movie where I don't know enough about it, but that was a script that everybody was in love with for a long time, and I think they might have butchered. But that was one of those scripts that people who read the script were like, this is one of the best science fiction movies. And I think by the time they made it, it ended up not being as good. So I'm just saying,
fair enough.
The Dune movies
he did give me Dunes Part 1 and 2, and I love those.
Yeah. I just think it's so interesting that, and then just a murderer's row of a cast on this thing.
Oh, yeah. I mean, look. Let's just, run it down real quick. We got Nomi Pace. We got Logan Marshall Green. He's in good stuff.
Hey, man, if you can't get Tom Hardy, you call Logan Marshall Green.
Exactly.
Every time I see him, he's not a bad actor, but every time I see him, I just go, you wanted Tom Hardy?
We got Michael Fassbender, obviously the secret weapon of this movie. We got Charlize Theron. We got Idris Elba. Guy Pearce is maybe wildly miscast in this movie, but we'll get into that.
I'll talk about why Guy Pearce is in it. But you've got Sean Harris, who I love in the Mission Impossible movies. Rafe Spall, who's a great British actor. Benedict Wong being criminally wasted in this movie.
Absolutely criminally wasted. Benedict Wong, who of course would go on to play everyone's favorite Marvel character, Wong.
Yep. with Benedict Cumberbatch. It's so funny that his name is Benedict Wong, and he's playing Wong to Benedict Cumberbatch's Doctor Strange. Also, for one scene in a flashback, Patrick Wilson, I had forgotten that. That was weird.
Oh yeah,
Doing
that's her dad. Yeah,
doing a British accent in a weird, like, staticky flashback scene. I mean, I have to imagine
I thought the guy looked familiar, but holy crap, yeah, Patrick Wilson.
It's
what
Patrick
the hell?
Wilson, and once again, and doing a British accent. You've also got people like Kate Dickie. I mean, you've got a lot of like solid, real deal, classically trained British actors in this thing.
I mean, look, when Ridley Scott calls, you pick up the phone.
No, I mean, I think that's honestly where you're like, why is Patrick Wilson in this for one scene? It's like, I'm sure he was like, oh, Ridley Scott Alien prequel? Yeah, I'll show up for a day. Are you kidding me? Yeah, who wouldn't want to be in? I mean, and all the, like I said, I remember when they put out the teaser, and it was just the ship and the letters forming Prometheus like the Alien logo. I was like, oh my God, this is going to be the movie of the year. Sir Ridley's back.
Let's start with that poster, because I think this movie does, I mean, we mentioned at the end of the last episode.
Yeah.
This movie does have a killer tagline.
Oh my God, it's so good. And also, great, creepy poster where seeing that you're like, oh, what is this? It's the
search for our beginning could lead to our end.
And it's just the figure in the spacesuit shining the flashlight up at the giant engineer head.
Yeah.
And you're just like, ooh. It's interesting, though, and reading about the production of it is what I remember kind of hearing the reports about it, where it was like, Ridley Scott is coming back. Well, we've talked about this, which I learned this for this.
We keep talking about it over the course of the series.
That basically every time they made another Alien movie, Ridley Scott goes, "Can you make a movie? I want to make a movie about the origins of the aliens." And they're like, "Yeah." And then finally, eventually, the franchise was in such dire straits. They were like, "Hey, Ridley, how about that idea about the origins of the alien species?"
Well, because that's the weird, like, we're in the weird, like, lull kind of period of the franchises. After Predators, we enter this, like, pretty long stretch of, well, even before Predators, because what? AVP Requiem was 2003, 2004?
Requiem was 2007, yeah. The first one is 2004, the second one's 2007. And then it's 3 years
Predators,
to get, that's 2010. This is 2012. There definitely feels like this is I think you're right. This is a time when Fox is like, I know these properties still have value, but we clearly, because the AVP movies, neither one did what they wanted them to do, even though they were both not bombs. Predators, similar thing, right? We talked about, actually, Predators did quite well, but not what they were hoping. And so,
and again, like, whether or not that movie was, or any Predator movie was ever going to set the world on fire is a matter of debate.
That's a little insane. And then this will come out and do decent as well. Spoiler when we get to the thing. This did okay.
Yeah.
But kind of similar to those that we've talked about, and like a lot of the Alien sequels, like, I don't think any of the Alien sequels are really bombs, or in this case, prequel. It's just that there people go, but there's a general palpable feeling of, yeah, people kind of didn't dig it. It's a weird thing.
Yeah.
Because this thing did $403 million off of a $130 million budget.
Which is respectable, absolutely.
Oh, no.
Especially for, like, an R-rated horror movie.
Yeah. That was a big point of contention, by the way, was the rating. Fox really wanted this thing down to a PG-13.
Okay. Where do you cut in this film to make it PG-13? If you're the editor with the mandate from the studio saying make it PG-13, but the movie is shot, where do you cut from?
I mean, it'd be a lot of little things, right? It'd be less graphic with her cutting herself open. It'd be a little bit less footage of like melted faces and space helmets. You'd probably just be severing just little pieces off of some of the more graphic violence. And Ridley Scott said,
no, like, whole scenes.
I don't think so. Do you see anything that would be like? Because I don't think there's a lot of language. There's just the implication of a sex scene. It's not really anything graphic there. I don't really think anything would have to go fully.
The only thing I can think of that would be tough to cut around are the two instances in which we completely immolate people.
Yeah.
Because I don't know how we cut around that in the footage we have.
Yeah, you'd have to play it more on the reactions of the people than them actually burning.
Yeah.
That's one of my favorite pieces of trivia from that. That Charlize Theron, they talk about. There's no acting in that because that was a real flamethrower on a real stuntman, and she was like, "You want me to set this man on fire?" And they're like, "Yeah, no, it's cool." And she was like, I don't." That's
like
not,
a human being, she had the proper response of, I don't want to set another human being on fire.
You're asking me to shoot fire at that man. Like, yeah. And they're like, he's fine. This is what he does. And it's just like, yeah, you just can't, even if you're assured that, you would just be like, I don't know what.
I would rather not.
Yeah. No, it's fine. He does this all the time. Like,
For him, it's a Tuesday.
Yeah, I know. I mean, that's the thing about the stunt guys are crazy. Ridley Scott did say about the rating, he goes, I shot it not thinking about rating. I didn't pull anything back, but I also didn't lean into make an R rating. His attitude was, I'm making this movie, whether it's PG-13 or R, that's not for me to decide.
I mean, I think that's totally fair. This movie doesn't go as gross as it maybe could have in the way that like AVP Requiem does, right?
No, because that's not a Ridley Scott thing, right? He's not a guy who's like, check it out, look at it, man. But he's also like, I'm not going to back off either.
Yeah.
So I think that was his attitude. Was he was like, but I will say, apparently there was like a thing where it's like, dude, if it leans R, it's going to cost this much. If it leans PG-13, we'll give you a little more, sort of thing. It was like contingent on budget there. Although, like we said, I mean, $403 million for what is essentially also, that's sort of the thing too. This is kind of a little bit of a bait and switch of like what is mostly like a contemplation about humanity and stuff like that. That's pretty good for what is. But I gotta say, the big overarching problem I have with this movie is it delivers on neither. It doesn't have the thrills you expect from an alien movie, and I'm okay with it being a heady sci-fi movie, but it's not a very good one.
Yeah, I mean, you and I have gone back and forth on the quality of the film Interstellar, but at least it is like more doggedly pursuing that conversation in the text of the film.
Interstellar, I understand what's trying. I don't know what this movie is trying to say. I don't know that
bad.
Yeah, well, that's it exactly. But it's sort of this thing where it's like, because of course, I mean, when we get to this, the basic plot of the movie, I'm sure everyone here has seen it. If you haven't,
if you haven't seen Prometheus, we're gonna spoil the crap out of it. Also, always. You don't have to go see Prometheus.
No, but but the basic idea being this, because I mean, from what I gather, reading about it, at a certain point in the production of this, Ridley Scott started reading about like ancient aliens and the idea of
Chariot of the Gods is all over this movie.
But it's an interesting thing where they were already developing this movie and it wasn't about that, and then Ridley Scott got very interested in that and started steering the movie to that. And so the idea being that,
for those who don't know, Chariots of the Gods is a book that came out, I want to say in like the late 80s, early 90s.
Chariots,
or is it older than that?
Chariot of the Gods, 1968.
Holy crap. Anyway, it proposes that aliens arrived on Earth and aided ancient humanity in developing technology, and like certain structures around the world are clearly benefited from technology that was beyond them at the time.
If you wondered where all that ancient aliens, like you can all kind of chart it back to this book, right? That it sort of starts from there and it splinters down.
I personally detest these sorts of theories,
even
though
nonsense.
I am definitely in like the Mulder I want to believe kind of category, but it totally undercuts like human ingenuity, that really itches my skin.
You know who hated that book was Gene Roddenberry and hated all those theories.
Totally.
Because that's the opposite of the point of Star Trek, right? Is he's just like, fuck that. We did those things.
Which is so funny though, because in those OG episodes, aliens that are kind of the Greek gods showing up,
He
sort
does,
of undercutting those points.
Well, yeah, but also he sort of argues that they're like Flim Flam Man too, right? Like they
Yeah.
may have presented themselves, but they're full of shit and selfish. Is also kind of the point of those. Like anyway, but he specifically mentions the author of that book, Ridley Scott does, Eric von Daniken, or Daniken, as being a major influence on this script, having read his books. And because I mean the basic plot of the movie is group of scientists find evidence that they have this whole thing where it's like we're finding across all these cultures this image of these stars and these beings, and there's no way they could know about those things, and they all match up perfectly. So let's go try to find the source of life on Earth, basically.
Right, because the only like astral body that coincides with this formation of constellations we're seeing in all these pictograms is this thing that no one could even see from Earth without telescope technology, and they all show humans worshiping these big beings, so let's go and try to find them.
Yep. And I'm sure you're going like, and that has to do with the Alien franchise? How? Fair point.
So, dear listener, remember back to the first episode of this particular series in which we talked about the Ridley Scott film Alien.
Yeah.
In that movie, our intrepid crew of the Nostromo finds a derelict spaceship on a uncharted planet in the middle of nowhere space. That spaceship, shaped like a big letter C, is just sticking up out of the ground. On that spaceship, they find a weird telescope-looking thing with a weird bug-looking dude sitting in a chair.
To be dubbed the
that
space
bug-looking
jockey,
dude had a rib cage that had broken out from the inside, thus implying mystery about the plot that would go forward.
Yeah.
Those quote-unquote space jockeys were always a source of mystery in the Alien franchise.
And it was,
until now.
And that was, as we talked about, that was always the thing, was Ridley Scott goes, I want to explain how those things happened. What the deal with that was, how that got there. And that's not a bad impulse necessarily, although this will come up on the show a lot. I'm always leery of prequels. There are good ones, but you would say, wouldn't you agree? The weight is definitely against them. I would say there are many more bad ones than good ones.
There are so many narrative traps that exist within a prequel.
Yeah.
Because you either have to do one of two things in a prequel to make it like a cohesive story, and that is things go exactly how you think they do and thus are boring, or things are a big bait and switch, making the events of the thing that you love, which you're getting a prequel for, less impactful.
Right. In the words of, I can't remember if he said it on the show or just to us in person, our pal Ibrahim Mustafa, I always attribute this to, because he said this. He said, the problem with prequels is, do you want to see your favorite story before all the cool shit happened?
Yeah. And like you say, there are some prequels that can like take characters before we knew them, quote unquote, and like tell a cool story around them, or can like reveal some part of the world, or like the Star Wars prequels. I mean, say what you will about them, but is this like inherent tragedy that you're telling with those stories that could be good.
The problem with the Star Wars prequels is more in execution than in concept. The tragedy of Anakin Skywalker is a great story, and that deserves to be told.
Mm-hmm.
Whether or not it, there are little things, but if you just were to, the basic beats of that are a story I love quite a bit.
And the problem with making a prequel to Alien to explain the space jockey stuff is that you have to invent the context out of whole cloth.
Right.
And so in inventing that context, you are tasked with making us care about a whole new cast of characters that we know are irrelevant to the series going forward because none of them is named Ellen Ripley.
Yeah, that's always a frequent problem in prequels, right? Especially if you're not telling the origins of characters we know and love. then you always have to go like, well, why do I care about these people?
Yeah. And look, you can get me invested in characters who I know aren't going to come up later.
Of course.
Like, I didn't know who Padme Amidala was before the Star Wars prequels, but now I care deeply about her because she's tied into the tragedy of Anakin Skywalker.
I mean, I will say that the Lucas had the benefit of being able to include like Obi-Wan. The thing in this is there's nobody, right?
And unless you include just the name Wayland.
Yeah, which I don't.
Yeah, because they're undoubtedly the bad guys of the franchise.
Right, but it's like we I mean, and the other thing that I think is very interesting about that is Wayland Yutani doesn't get mentioned until the Cameron movie. It's just the company in the original movie.
Right. It says Wayland Yutani in the background.
Oh, does it?
Movie, like it's on computer screens and
maybe,
stuff.
Yeah. Okay, so all right. I was gonna say that's an interesting thing where Scott picked up a lot from that, but it's so interesting that, like we're talking about, in reading about the development of this movie, it was, I think, the original John Spaeth was the first guy hired. I think off of the strength of his spec script, Passengers. Once again, which, like I said, that was like, you got to read this script. This is one of the most interesting, and I think a lot of the edges got sanded off of it. I think it was a darker, more interesting movie. And then it became a movie star vehicle and a famous disaster. But he was hired to do this. He was hired. They said, Ridley Scott wants to do the prequel to Alien, and I believe his script was called Alien: Origin.
Which, sure, if you're gonna make an origin movie, why not call it Origins?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, and I think that's what it was called. I'll confirm that so that I don't want to throw him under the bus if it wasn't. But the thing about it though was, like, he wrote, I think they said 5 drafts of that, and then Ridley Scott at a certain point, it was called Alien Engineers. Sorry, that's what it was called. Alien Engineers. And you can read that script it's out online. And then eventually Ridley Scott was like, I don't really want to make an Alien movie. I want to make something set in the alien world, but I want to expand it bigger and get into this idea about the aliens were created by something, but so were we. Because he was big on this idea that we've kind of pushed back. This is the thing I think that's key to also a thing we've talked about, where I kind of am not with Ridley Scott on this idea that the xenomorph was engineered by something.
Well, okay, we're gonna. How hard do you want to go in on this conversation? I can go light, medium, and on this conversation.
Let's go medium. As I think it medium. Deserves something, but I don't want to derail the podcast.
This movie cannot make up its mind if the engineers made xenomorph or not. In the text of the film, just what is said implies that, but what is shown does not.
Right.
Because the big thing is when they first find the original, like, I don't know, altar, the place with all the little casks with the black goo. We have the one of the scientist characters, Logan Marshall Green's character, say this is just another tomb. Yeah. And he is saying that at this like bas relief that shows something that looks vaguely like a xenomorph.
Right.
Implying that the engineers know about this life form and kind of revere it in some way.
Right.
That doesn't imply to me that this is something that we grow and keep on a shelf.
It's an interesting thing. Like I said, I think it's interesting that this movie went through 2 screenwriters and so many different drafts, because it still feels undercooked when you watch it. You're still, I think that the biggest thing to me is this is a movie that wants to be very heady sci-fi, but isn't actually committing to much. It's got all these ideas, and it's like,
and there are things I could say right now that I won't, because there is a movie in this franchise you haven't seen yet.
Well, yeah, and I know Romulus is trying to make all things make sense.
And they kind of do, which is a magic trick that movie pulls, in my opinion.
Interesting.
Now, whether or not it's like good, that's open to interpretation, but
Yeah.
they sort of do make it make sense.
Well, it seems like there's a lot of people who argue that the alien engineers. I went down this rabbit hole as we've been talking. There's a lot of people that seem to prefer, or like they should have shot alien engineers.
I mean, look, that's what everyone's going to say about every unmade script, right?
It's true because number one, stands.
I've read Duel of the Fates.
Well, Duel of the Fates is better, though. I mean, or at least Duel of the Fates on paper feels more satisfying from a narrative standpoint, right?
Sure.
But I think that's the idea too, is right. You're not looking at a movie; you're reading, going like, "Oh, that would have been smarter."
Duel of the Fates is the unmade script that instead got made into Rise of Skywalker.
Right. So, but it sounds like the Aliens Engineer script sounds much cleaner and more straightforward, and I think what Scott brought Lindelof in to do is to create more of the philosophical stuff, more of this broad mythology. Because from what I gather, the big complaint from Scott was the sequel to Alien Engineers is Alien. I want a movie where the sequel is Prometheus 2.
Sure. And this movie is raising these big, or what it thinks are big questions, right? About the origin of life and what that means and our place in terms of the universe, but also in regards to the function of faith and like what we consider to be the things we hold sacred and true about humanity and our species, without really definitively stating what questions our characters are actually looking after. It's creating this sense of heady contemplation without actually like getting into, or it does get into it, but then like its ultimate answer is just like, because they felt like it, because it's a whim, because like people are messy and sloppy, and so the answer is always going to be messy.
I think the end of the movie is very much like, well, we found God and he hates us, and you're like, yeah, but why? It's like, well, because he's a prick. Like, it's just sort of, it's kind of right. It's sort of the end. Like the end.
Shit, it's the end of Star Trek: The Motion Picture.
Well, oh yeah. Well, actually, that's for VG. You're talking more Star Trek 5.
Oh, fair enough.
And actually, I really like the end of Star Trek 5 because, number one, I love Kirk questioning. I'm going to get derailed. We'll do a Star Trek. I swear we're going to do a Star Trek movie season. Don't worry. I'll talk about my great defense of Star Trek 5. But the thing about it is, all the questions it's raising are interesting, heady sci-fi topics. But at the end of the movie, it does just turn into like, oh, God, these things are evil. But you kind of, when the whole thing about like, if we don't stop them now, they're going to destroy. And you're just like, okay, I don't feel, I understand
the third act of this movie has to create stakes, right?
Yeah.
And the stakes aren't survival. The stakes are, they're going to destroy Earth.
Right.
I'm like, why do we have to raise the stakes that high?
Yeah. You just like, and you just kind of going like you're saying, but why? Like, why is it?
What's always been effective about the Alien franchise, and why I think it's such a good like place to tell stories, and why people keep getting drawn back to it, is because it presents this like nihilistic, bleak interpretation of the future that is sort of the opposite of Star Trek, right? Whereas Star Trek creates this utopian post-scarcity society. This is a society in the future that everything serves under a corporate heel, and we are ground into almost like non-existence within this cog, within this greater machine. And even beyond that, and that's what we need to like keep being human in this like sterile, evil, horrible universe. There is something even worse out there that doesn't care about any of us trying to be human, and it creates this cosmic horror that exists within the Alien franchise. And this movie is trying to like touch that cosmic horror while giving us like too many answers that like kind of make it too easily understood, I guess.
Oh, interesting. In the space script is where it was expressly that they were engineered by the engineers as weapons of war. So they backed off
and
on the direct idea that these were specifically created as the ultimate weapon.
And it's sort of implied in this movie that that this is like a biological warfare thing. Idris Elba's character is just like, I've been in militaries.
Hey,
I know what a
man,
weapons depot looks
it's me,
like.
Kentucky Fried Idris Elba, baby. Why?
He's got a southern accent and he plays an accordion. Don't question it.
I mean, it's a real bummer because 3 of my absolute favorite actors are in this movie: him, Fassbender, and Guy Pearce. And other than Fassbender, the other 2, and poor Charlize Theron's an interesting thing because I don't know if you saw this. She was cast as the Noomi Rapace role. She was supposed to be the lead, had to drop out. Then the other project she dropped out for didn't go. So when she came back, they had already cast Noomi Rapace, and they said, "Well, do you want to play the corporate lady?"
Who turns out to be Waylon's daughter?
Yes. But
That's such a weird turn in the movie.
Charlize Theron is such an amazing actress and can obviously do so many things. But this just requires her to be bitchy boss lady, like cold business lady. And I just kept going like, what a waste of this incredibly talented actress who can kind of do anything, right? I mean, we've seen her play so many different kinds of characters and different genres and stuff.
I mean, if you really want to read into it, and it's only the product of a single scene in which they confront each other.
Yeah.
But the whole relationship between Vickers and David is this like rival sibling relationship, right?
Right.
Because they're both vying for the affection of Peter Wayland in some way.
Yeah. And we got to talk about, clearly, David was the favorite character of the filmmakers and the audience, right? Like they once they started writing David, the whole movie just was like everyone else fell by the wayside. Became very clear to me.
Besides Ripley, the androids are always the most interesting characters in every.
Well, because the thing that Lindelof said that I think is very interesting about him is these are, these humans on this ship. This is a mission to discover their creators. But to David, his creator's right there.
Yeah.
And you're like, yeah, that is interesting.
The most fascinating philosophical question broached in this movie happens when David is talking to Holloway, Logan Marshall Green's character, at the pool table.
Mm-hmm.
Holloway is drunk, and David is asking, like, well, why did humans create me? If you're looking for the answer of why did humans create me? And he says, well, because we could. And then David comes back at him like, if you asked that question and were given that answer, how disappointed would you be?
Great line. All the great lines are Fassbender's. I mean, like, he's just, and that's the case in Covenant as well. I mean, Covenant, Covenant is so fucking weird.
Covenant, if this movie is like trying to be an Alien prequel without trying to be a prequel, that movie is being dragged by its heels into being an Alien prequel.
Well, it's an Alien prequel. It's almost the reverse, right? It's an Alien prequel that Ridley Scott is trying to make a Prometheus sequel. And so we'll get into that. That movie is, I will say, this movie definitely has a vision. I think it's a flawed one. The second one feels considerably more compromised, which is rare for a Ridley Scott movie. A guy who usually fights, tooth and nail you don't question Sir Ridley. That's a guy with a vision. Although it's interesting, Space, I read an interview with Space where he was talking about he really struggled working with Ridley Scott because Ridley Scott is not a writer. He's an artist. He draws every scene and he'd be like, write a scene where this happens. It's like, he gave me a fucking drawing and was like, right, make that happen. You're like, I don't know what this is.
So, Ridley comes at him with the poster of the monolithic engineer face and says, make this a scene.
Yeah. And I think you can kind of feel, and that's where I do think, like I said, it is a beautiful movie. Every design I'm obsessed with the spacesuits. I think these are some of the coolest spacesuits in any movie. The design of the ship is amazing.
I genuinely like the design of the engineers. I know that's something of a contention within
I have no issue with
fans of the Alien franchise. But I think if you had to figure out what the space jockeys are, obviously you're making them less alien, quote unquote,
Yep.
by making them look human and making that skull we saw in the first Alien movie actually be a helmet.
Right. I have no
Which
issue with that.
I mean, I have issue with things looking more human than alien. I like my aliens to look alien.
But if you're getting into, well, but he's purposely drawing this idea of the progenitor of
Sure.
the human race, and then basically like the opposite of the human race, which is the xenomorph.
Right. But I think this movie, like I say, I think it explains a little too much and removes some of the horror aspect of the xenomorph by making it less removed from humans.
Whether this is valid or not, I mean, it was obviously Ridley Scott's intention, but a lot of people went to this movie and went, is this a horror movie? It's really not. It doesn't really, it's got a couple of moments that are designed to be scary, but it really has, and especially like the first hour plus, has no interest in even doing the building of the tension that's in the original Alien, which not a lot happens early on, but there's this ever like dread that's building in you. This is, I will say, watching it again, it's pretty boring
because not a lot happens, and you're introduced to all questions and characters in the first hour of the film.
And
the film is only 2 hours long.
No, it's not a super long movie, but none of the characters are very intriguing. One of my favorite scenes in the movie is David's life while they're in hypersleep.
Well, because you see, like, how does an android keep himself occupied?
Once again, and you're just like, yeah, it's like, how did you guys? They must have known, like, well, obviously everybody's gonna like this character more than all the other characters.
The viral marketing for this film was basically advertisements for David.
Yeah. And do you remember the TED Talks with Guy Pearce as Wayland?
I kept thinking that one of those was in the movie and it was never there.
Yeah.
And like, I haven't rewatched this film since I saw it in theaters until this morning.
I've seen it one time since. I did, because my reaction, I've done this. I came out of this movie going, maybe I need to see it again. So I did get it on Blu-ray and watched it, and that was when I was like, oh, it's bad. Like I thought the opposite. I thought, well, maybe it's just so heady. It's got so many questions. I need to go back in again, and then realizing just how empty the ideas were on the second viewing. So this was the third time I've seen it, but it had been quite a while.
Because yeah, I do remember the TED Talks. I remember watching those and being like, Guy Pearce, why are you just in the advertising for the movie?
Well, so an interesting thing about the guy, the baffling decision of Guy Pearce, because everybody was like, why did you hire Guy Pearce and put him in makeup? As they talk about, took 5 hours of makeup to make him look like that.
Yeah, to make him look like what Clint Eastwood looks like now.
And the idea was that they initially were going to cast, I think it was Max von Sydow as
that would have been good.
Wayland. But then Ridley Scott got in his head that he wanted all these flashback scenes of David and Wayland. And so they were like, no, we need to cast a young actor and then make him old. It's just then they cut out all the scenes of the young Wayland. So they shot a bunch of stuff with young-looking Guy Pearce.
Including those TED Talks.
Including those TED. So they shot, which I think they repurposed some of that stuff, right? But so the idea of like, well, wait, what? It's like, the whole reason why they moved away from an older actor to a younger actor playing old, then just got excised from the movie. So all that's left is, I'm sorry, is that Guy Pearce? Like, you're almost going like, like I know people were like, wait, that's Guy Pearce? Why?
Yeah.
Like,
why?
Like, not just a young, but like a super handsome, fit dude. Like, like,
yeah,
like a real leading man type. And then, it's just like, yeah, but he's like 90-year-old. I don't know. It's interesting. Let's see. The year after this, he'll be in Iron Man 3. Yeah.
Before this, he was just in Lockout. That was a fun movie.
I really enjoy it. He's super fun in that movie.
I mean, 2 years before this, he was in The King's Speech, and like, like he's really not exactly like,
but like revered, very well thought of actor, like everyone in this movie, kind of. And you're just like, what are you doing? Why is this? And I get why he would do it. Because once again, Ridley Scott calls as being the Alien prequel. I'm like, how much makeup? Sure, I don't fucking care. It's
trying to remember what was the last thing I saw him in. He constantly works, but I just like don't see half the stuff he was in.
I can't speak to that because of course I've seen all the like Australian and British TV that he's done.
Sure.
So like I saw Spy on
Oh
My
no,
Friends.
I know what the last thing I saw him in was.
What was that?
And it was the last movie I saw in theaters before the pandemic lockdown.
Oh, it's Bloodshot.
It's fucking Bloodshot.
He's the bad guy in Bloodshot. Yeah. Yeah. He's having a good time there.
I know he is, but boy, that movie's terrible.
He's really fucking good on Mayor of Easttown. If you haven't seen that show with him, and Kate Winslet, he's really really good in that. And he was good in Memory, which is one of those Liam Neeson old man action movies.
Of course.
No, the guy works a ton, but it's just this is one of the weirdest uses of him. He's an actor I love. I'm always happy to see him. I mean, one of my favorite movies is L.A. Confidential, which is really what broke him, and that's just a masterpiece of a film. But here, it is. You're just like, I mean, and I will say, like always, dude goes for it. He's doing full old man voice and thing. He's in.
Yeah, because he's in like 3 scenes in the movie.
Well, because
he's in the hologram at the beginning and then a couple of scenes at the end.
Yeah, because one of the big twists of the movie is he's on the ship.
Which he's just there so that like maybe these engineer aliens can like stop him from dying. Is his whole plan here?
I mean, it's interesting because Lindelof talked a lot about it. He goes, when I came onto this, the decision to move away from Alien, he goes, I started leaning into Ridley's Blade Runner. And I was thinking about Wayland almost has the like more life goal of Rutger Hauer in that movie. Where it's like he wants to find these things because it's like my time is limited, but maybe these things could give me more time. But it doesn't land. I mean, I would say it's not as well designed as that.
No, and again, it totally distracts from like any of the larger themes the movie is trying to play with, other than like, okay, we need to go talk to God, and everyone has their own reasons for why. And Noomi Rapace, how do you say your last name?
Noomi Rapace, I believe is how it's pronounced.
Noomi Rapace.
Yeah.
Her character has this turn from, well, we would love to figure out why, to turning into like, why do you hate us so much? And again, the answer is like ambivalence, basically.
She's a very good actress, but there's not a lot of meat on the bone for this character.
Yeah, and it all revolves, or it tries to revolve around this idea of faith with her, right?
Yeah.
Like there's this symbology that is used with her cross necklace that is, she's coming out here because she believes there will be something. That is what she sold Wayland on. And he was willing to sink $1 trillion into funding all of this because her belief in finding the origins of humanity was so strong that it convinced the wealthiest man in the world to fund a space trip out into the middle of the galaxy.
Now, in Space Draft, apparently he was a younger, more like Richard Branson, or I shudder to say Elon Musk type. And in that script, they had to go to a floating space station around Mars where he was hanging out to go pitch him on. I'm like, that sounds like a cool scene. I'm sure that just got changed because they're like, that also sounds expensive. I mean, it's even like the things like the cave they found in the beginning of the movie in Space Script it was underwater and they're all in like diving suits. And once again, I'm sure somebody was just like, that's expensive.
And I'm fine with them just finding a sealed cave somewhere.
It just sounds like, I mean, whatever. I'm none of that is, but it's interesting that I think a lot of stuff just got changed to simplify it. And I'm fine with him being, well, I don't know that you need the, like, does old Wayland, I mean, other than it furthers David's story, obviously, right? Of literally looking at his father.
Well, here's the interesting thing about Prometheus. This movie is clearly Ridley Scott trying to reclaim the Alien franchise in certain ways.
Because he's had many a quote where he's like, I never should have let it go.
Right. And we started talking about like, oh, they were Ridley Scott trying to make the origin of the alien back during Alien 3,
Yeah.
but we mentioned it again when we were talking about AVP.
Yeah.
And in AVP specifically, we have an old man Wayland
Yes.
who is not Peter Wayland. He's some other Wayland, progenitor.
Right.
And his whole thing in that movie isn't trying to escape death. It's leaving a mark so indelible upon history as to become effectively immortal, right? Like that's his whole goal in that movie.
I love the idea of making Wayland a character in this, but neither version that we've seen of Wayland so far has been particularly compelling to me, despite the fact they're both played by really good actors.
But it's just interesting that despite his needing to reclaim the bits of the franchise, when he goes to make his Wayland insert, it's still the old man afraid of being forgotten.
Yeah. I think it's going to be really interesting to see what Alien Earth does, which is, I think, trying to yet again give us the origin of this in a way that makes sense.
Which actually, since we recorded last time, we got our first teaser trailer of that.
That teaser rules.
Which establishes that the show takes place 2 years before the events of Alien.
It's basically what they find that leads them to send the Nostromo there.
Basically, it seems to be the implication. Yeah.
I do love Mother Earth is expecting. That rules. And then just the xenomorph face and Earth reflected and shiny. That's cool, man. I mean, I love Noah Hawley, who's the showrunner on that, so much, and he's somebody I do trust to do something interesting. And there's going to be a robot Oliphant in it. So,
hey, look, if we could have robot Oliphant and get Fassbender back for an episode,
because I mean,
maybe throw Lance Henriksen in there for fun.
Why not? I mean, sure, let's do it, man. Let's get all the alien robots in there while we're at it. I believe the space script did end with Ash getting the thing from the Wayland and being like, because his wasn't set as far in the past. The space script directly led, kind of like what this show is doing. Like I said, the end of that movie was like Ash gets the thing from the computer to say we have to go to this planet.
Yeah. And some of that gets recycled in you remember that comic book crossover that Dark Horse did?
Yes.
Fire and Stone.
I have. They're over on my shelf over there. Yeah. And they did that was, and one of those was a Prometheus tie-in.
Right, which I believe specifically like they go to this planet in that comic.
Well, that's one of the big difference. That's one of the biggest. That's something that seems small, but is actually a huge difference between the drafts. In Space Draft, they go to the planet in Alien. In this,
they go to LV-426.
Yeah, in this, they go to a different planet. Like literally, the space jockey that would have been seen in Alien Engineers would have been the exact space jockey body they find in Alien.
Right. Instead, here they're on LV-223.
Totally different planet. And actually, I will say, I mean, part of the practical appeal of this, they shot all this stuff in Iceland, and it looks great. It looks alien. It looks, intimidating. Like I said, I think visually, watching this movie with the sound off, you'd be like, wow.
Yeah.
This is quite the film.
There isn't really a part where I go like, oh, that was a little shoddy effects-wise. I think everything looks...
I think a lot of that was Ridley's commitment to doing it practically. Mm-hmm. Although people have pointed out, and he even acknowledges it doesn't make sense. They're like, why is the tech better?
The way I write it off is like, okay, this is privately funded by like a rich, super wealthy guy.
They were blue collar space miners in the original.
Yeah, space truckers.
Yeah, there you go. That works.
Yeah, that's how I write it off.
Ridley Scott was more just like, yeah, who cares? Like, I will say one of the things I do love Ridley Scott on reviews. He's a prickly dude who'll just be like, who fucking cares? What does it matter? What do you want about? It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
if you watch the movie, you should watch the movie.
Yeah. Well, that was his thing about when Napoleon and people were talking about like historical inaccuracies. He's like, I don't fucking care. Makes no difference to me. Whatever.
Yeah. Good for him.
Yeah. Well, dude's 86 now.
Yeah.
And he's just like, look, I just make the movies. Whether you like them, that's not up to me. It is interesting. He is still the only person, according to the trivia here, to direct more than one Alien movie.
True.
Yeah. I think the plan is to bring back Fede Alvarez, who did Romulus, for the next one.
Cool.
I think that's the idea.
We haven't talked about Alien Romulus yet, but I dug that movie, so I'm cool with that.
Yeah. I mean, I think they were mostly happy with that. So, can we talk about the Lawrence of Arabia stuff? That feels like
Scott, David likes Lawrence of Arabia and is like styling himself after
Peter O'Toole in that movie. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't quite know what that's meant to be, other than I think Ridley Scott thinks that's cool and likes that movie.
Yeah, that's as much as I read into it, other than like,
it's an interesting.
Okay,
it is an interesting.
It immediately identifies that we have this robot character that is attempting to be more human by
No, that's
osmosis.
the thing. It's an interesting wrinkle, the idea that a robot would see someone and be like, I want to be like that. Because not only do we see him watching it and then reciting the lines, he bleaches his hair blonde like O'Toole in that movie. They make a point of showing, and he combs his hair exactly, and he's trying to mimic. Fassbender did try to change his accent to sound like O'Toole's. And once again, it shows. Fassbender worked his ass off on this thing. This character is so, every beat of how he walks, moves, looks at things is so incredibly calculated.
Yeah, he, like I said, is the secret weapon of this movie.
Yeah.
He's the character your eye is drawn to in every scene he's present in, and his machinations moving through the movie are what actually gives this movie any sort of propulsion.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. He's the thing, and I think he's a big reason why I came out of this movie with somewhat of a positive thing. I was like, he's just so compelling to watch.
It's also the reason he's the only returning character in Alien Covenant.
That is true. Fassbender studied Olympic diver Greg Louganis to look at the physicality, the way he holds himself like ramrod straight, and like the way divers walk out. I guess that's how he saw this character. I don't know.
It's always interesting seeing an actor's take on playing an artificial person, right? Because you have this full range from someone like the robot from Lost in Space, just danger, Will Robinson,
right,
to something that is attempting to mimic humanity, and where you find the interesting performances are somewhere in between, right? Whether you go from like Arnold Schwarzenegger in all the different Terminator movies, you have Fassbender in this, or like what's his name, Alan Tudyk's performance in iRobot.
I mean, even look at the just between Ian Holm, Lance Henriksen, and Fassbender as being the robots of this franchise. They all are very different, because Ian Holm is obviously a sleeper agent, sort of, amongst the people, passing as human. Bishop is just very much a robot, is a very pleasant, but makes himself known as, isn't trying to be anything other than, I am your companion, You can trust me. And then, he is the most complex of the group, David.
Well, again, there's a movie you haven't seen yet, and I will say David Johnson plays Andy in Alien Romulus, and is hands down the best performance in that film. And we'll get to it when we get to it.
Yeah, that seemed to be what I heard most people say. But the thing about it, but it's an interesting thing, because you're like, Ian Holm was an evil robot. If you're just sort of, there's more to it, but he's the evil corporate entity. Bishop is the ultimately heroic robot, because it's the turn on this. David is really hard to pin down.
David is the character that is attempting to grapple with every heady question this movie is bringing up, right? By being the character who is at the same time the manifestation of those questions as a creation of humanity. An artificial intelligence inherently begins to ask those questions of, what do the rights of created sentience have to their creators, and vice versa?
Well, and ultimately, by the end of this movie, and particularly in Covenant, the contemplation of those questions breaks you.
Right. And this movie ultimately isn't trying to answer any of those questions outside of just saying, no, none of it makes any sense.
And that's fine because these questions don't really have answers, and so science fiction can raise questions without answering them. The problem is it doesn't just not answer them; it seems to throw up his hands and be like, "Fucking now we just gotta race this ship and crash into." Like it does feel like they're just sort of like, yeah, but we still need like an action climax. So like we're talking about, it's just like, oh shit, you got to do this, and it is incredible. The way Charlize Theron dies is incredibly stupid. Is exactly right.
Oh, the way basically everyone dies in this movie is really stupid. That's one of the bigger complaints about this film.
Yeah.
And let's just do a quick rundown because like plenty of people have talked about the stupid deaths in this movie. But okay, the biologist poking the animal he's never seen before and saying, "Aren't you lovely?" Real stupid. The geologist getting lost in the cave system he has mapped. So stupid.
Yeah.
Charlize Theron running basically parallel to the thing that is trying to crush her.
It's
incredibly stupid.
It's a big giant
Noomi
column.
Rapace literally rolls 4 times and gets out of the way.
Yeah, it doesn't take much for her to get out of the way.
No, it's incredibly stupid.
No, people have talked about this movie is one of the biggest, most famous complaints about this movie is that they are the stupidest smart people in film. That everyone in this movie is supposed to be like top tier, brilliant scientists, and they're all morons.
I was really taken by the metaphor of what you talked about just a second ago when you said this movie abandons all of its questions.
Yeah.
The metaphor that like really encapsulates that to me is in the third act of this movie when we finally wake up a living engineer, and the character that I just said is like the avatar of all these deep, heady questions.
Yeah.
Gets his head torn off, and then he uses that head to beat Mr. Wayland to death, and then the movie just turns into an action chase.
No, I mean it's so interesting. The movie by the end, but that's the thing is, the action isn't very interesting. It turns hard into action, and it's fine, but it's like it's just like, oh, this movie's plugging along. You're like, oh, where is this going? What are these questions? It's just like, run from the things.
And that's the whole third act of the movie is run from the things.
We've talked about this before. That's what these default to. And I think one of the reasons, and I haven't seen Romulus, and I know you're a fan of it. I have no opinion of it, obviously, because I haven't seen it. But I think one of the reasons we keep going back to those first two movies is there's a real simplicity for it. They are run from the things, but they just own being. These are thrillers that are designed to quicken the pulse, and we're not exploring questions as much as it is like you're just viscerally locked in with characters you like. That's the thing. I don't like any of these characters. David fascinates me. But like that's what I'm saying about like Noomi Rapace is just like I don't dislike her, but what is there to like about Elizabeth Shaw as our hero?
That she has this deep intrinsic faith in finding answers, but also is sterile, and that's an important plot point.
Yeah. I mean, I will say that is one of the more memorable scenes in this movie is her using the machine to perform the C-section on herself, basically.
Yeah. There's a whole. I mean, it is the most captivating scene because it is like
it's where thriller director Ridley Scott is at his most powerful for sure.
Yeah, because she has some kind of alien thing growing in her. Spoiler alert, it's kind of a super face hugger, but and she wants it out of her. David is trying to freeze her so that they can just have, I guess, a sample of that thing growing in her. And she manages to bust out to this super med machine to perform a C-section on herself.
It's a gnarly
scene and captivating and gnarly.
She's great. I mean, she's great in the scene. Like I said,
yeah,
she's coming off of having done the Girl with the Dragon Tattoo trilogy. When they do this, this was sort of a classic thing of like, she's huge in these foreign movies she got a claim for. Let's bring her over and put her in, a big American studio franchise movie. And like often happens, it's not her fault. It's just that they've given her a character that isn't super interesting to play. And of course, is seemingly at the end of this movie set up to continue to be the lead of this franchise, and then isn't.
Yeah, I mean, from what I remember of Covenant, it has the classic, like, this feels like a straight-to-video release that got released into theaters.
Yeah, it does sort of feel like, well, because like I said, so much of Covenant is correcting from this movie. But like aesthetic things, where you're just like, don't you want to see more alien stuff? It's like, yeah, but he doesn't have these screenwriters back. It really feels like, oh, that didn't work. This
Danny McBride's there for some reason.
You know what? I saw a thing with Dan. Well, we'll talk. Actually, I'll talk about that in the next one. Anyway, he was just happy to watch Ridley Scott work. Obviously.
Sure. Yeah.
I think that's the thing about this. But I will say this movie distinctly screams of a classic thing. And I think we mentioned Roddenberry. I think it's a thing that happened with him too, where the creator is back to the franchise, but you're like, oh, you might not actually understand why your creation works. Which is always a weird thing. Like that was the thing with Roddenberry, it was like when he came back for Next Generation and people were going like, no, that's not good Star Trek. Like that, it's like there's no conflict anymore, okay? And you're like, that's not how a story works, Gene, it's like he's thought about it too much. In these they've been thinking about it, and then it's almost just like, I got to get all these ideas in this thing.
And that's cool for a Ridley Scott original film called Prometheus.
Yeah.
But when you tie it into a larger franchise that has made its bones since that first movie you made off of being kind of schlocky, all told.
Well, we talked about, I think one of the geniuses of both the original Alien and Predator movies is they are extremely well done B movies. They are B-movie concepts made by top-tier talent at a level we're not used to. And so they're really fun. This, like I said, we were talking about this just before we started recording. This movie isn't fun. And it doesn't, it doesn't have to be a rollicking, action adventure movie, but there's just, like, my pulse was never quickened. You use the word sterile. The whole movie's kind of sterile.
It's funny because this movie has a similar, we mentioned it earlier because of Spaeth's involvement in it, but the Dune movies, right? Or any Denis Villeneuve movie, honestly, has a very similar tone to what Prometheus is going for.
Well, it's very interesting that Denis Villeneuve made the second Blade Runner. Yeah. And I think that movie's incredible.
But his films are these kind of like slow, contemplative. Obviously, they can ramp up and down as required. Like the second Dune movie is pretty rapacious in terms of its action.
It's a war picture.
And even the first one has plenty of action to go around.
Yeah, but the second one really feels like a war movie. But the
second one also doesn't shy away from contemplating these how do we how is power used against the people that empower the leaders?
I think because all of his movies, and he's one of my favorite filmmakers, period. But whether it be his sci-fi stuff or his non-sci-fi stuff, but particularly in the sci-fi stuff like we're talking about, he never gets he always remembers it's about people. That you will never, audiences don't go to movies for ideas. I mean, if they're there, that's great. But at the end of the day, these have to be stories about people. They have to be, or else you just check out. That's my thing in this movie. I just check out because even if the concepts are interesting, I don't care about the people who are asking the questions. I don't, even if I like the actors. I mean, Idris as cowboy pilot guy, I love Idris, but you're just like, but I'm also going like, why is Idris in this part? You're just going like, that's great, but
Sean Harris is like prickly geologist. Yeah. You know me, John. I love a prickly geologist.
He has one line when he talks about like, whoa. I'm a geologist. You're talking about like silly, space prophecy bullshit. And I thought like, oh man, that's the one time anyone is like, what the fuck are we doing? But then of course he goes out there and acts like an idiot. I mean,
Right. The guy who mapped the base they're in gets lost. Yeah.
and he has the cool laser mapping balls, which are awesome.
Yep.
And then he's
Which,
like, wait.
if we watch the screens that are with Idris Elba on the ship, they never lose track of those things. So
Yeah.
how does he get lost?
Yeah, I mean, was it Fifield and Milburn are the two that are the most like people are just like, these guys are idiots.
Yeah.
And they're both, it's so interesting too because Sean Harris now is most famous for playing Solomon Lane in the Mission Impossible franchises, a lethally intelligent character, a hyper focused. I mean, he can do that. He can be, and in this, he's just and Logan.
I know about rocks. You don't know about rocks.
Logan Marshall Green is Holloway. Holloway. The scene that got me, and it's just bad writing, is where it's like, well, we found the engineers. Why are you still wearing your cross? Like, oh, because it couldn't have any other meaning than that is the distinct truth. Also, great scientists to go, we found one thing, therefore it's definitive proof.
Also, he's the first scientist to take his helmet off in the alien atmosphere.
And he's like, hey man, let's see what happens, bro.
His character is so all over the place for me. He's this cavalier mixture of rogue scientist, but also like, I don't know. He reads to me like that college guy that has started reading like the classics and thinks they have a deeper understanding of like literature or science.
What's so interesting is in Space Draft, he's much older and he's a professor and she's his student. They don't have a relationship. So it's interesting. I think they kept going like younger. And then, so I think his character definitely suffers from rewrites and re-envisionings as it went forward. Because, I don't like this guy.
Because there's also this turn, like, in the scene where he's going to get infected by David.
Yeah.
Where he seems, like, super bummed out that they have found an alien civilization.
I mean, that's the thing is I'm like, this guy's a scientist? He just doesn't act like anyone I would think would be, all of his reactions to stuff. Like we said, him cavalierly pulling off his helmet. Him not being like, holy shit. Him just being like, well, there's your answer. These aren't scientists.
We say he's a scientist. I guess we say the same thing of Shaw. So Shaw and Holloway are two like primary protagonists, I guess. They're the first characters were introduced.
What are they, anthropologists?
That's what I was going to ask. Is like, what actual science are they?
Well, because in the beginning of the movie, they're excavating caves. So I've read them as archaeologists and anthropologists kind of people.
Just vague, like Indiana Jones kind of.
Just based on the way they're introduced, I mean, it's kind of similar to the way like Alan Grant is introduced in Jurassic Park and stuff like that, or Indiana Jones. They're excavating stuff.
I couldn't help realize that they are introduced in the exact same way that the archaeologist from AVP is introduced as well.
Yeah. Actually, absolutely.
Which struck me as just like, wait, hold on.
Well, it's like as you brought up before, it's so funny that Ridley Scott was like, fuck that movie. It destroyed the franchise. I'm going to get it right. And then he probably inadvertently pulls strands from those.
Mm-hmm. The ancient aliens thing. One of our main characters is an archaeologist who puts together all these different like clues about different civilizations.
Is this just a
piling
trap
up on each
for
other?
these movies? It seems like this is just a pitfall of this franchise for some reason. I don't know what it's just like.
No, it's a pitfall of engaging in ancient alien theories at all because you have to accept certain things for it to make any sense.
Yeah. Well, the best use of that to me is Stargate, right? Because they have the device of the Stargate.
Yeah, sure. Stargate does it about as well as anyone.
Because that's the thing is like, but you eschew a lot of those problems by just going, they came through this thing we made up.
Or the Thor in the Marvel movies.
Right, where you just like,
they've got the Rainbow Bridge, you can zap them back and forth.
That makes it that just instantly makes it so much easier. But can we talk about the creature at the end?
Oh, sure. Well, we haven't talked a lot about like any of the creatures, honestly.
Okay,
I will say this: there are quite a few good-looking monsters in this movie.
Oh, I don't really have anything. Once again, pretty much almost across the board. If we're talking just visuals, great. The little cobra snake thing that Rafe Spall is like, hi there, little buddy.
Yeah,
And I like
there's like the mutant monster that the guy turns into
Holloway.
when Sean Harris gets infected by the black
Oh,
goo.
Sean Harris. Yeah, Sean Harris. Yeah.
He turns into like a rage zombie for some reason.
Yeah, that's cool.
I will never forgive myself if I get out of this episode without saying that the black goo is actually called chemical AD-3959X.91-15.
That's easy to remember.
Also known as Prometheus's fire, or black goo, black liquid, or the pathogen.
The black
I'm
glue,
here on Xenopedia.
Yeah, also on Xenopedia, which I also have open, but about the earlier drafts of this, the black goo is all Lindelof.
Oh yeah, I mean that makes sense.
Yeah, it was just that they went there and found xenomorphs in the space draft.
Sure,
they were a big part of the movie, and instead we get a kind of xenomorph at the end of this movie.
Yeah, we get something that's referred to as the Deacon.
Yeah.
And it is like a proto-xenomorph, not to be confused with proto-xenomorphs, which is a different thing.
Yeah. Jesus. It's just...
and not to be confused with neomorphs, which we'll see in the next movie.
I think, it's just... I think it was just... This whole movie is just a kind of a miscalculation of how much people were interested in any of this stuff. And I think people would get interested in the stuff if you built a story that engaged them and thrilled them and also seeded this stuff in. You could do it. But it just gets... this thing gets so up its own ass.
And again, we have all these little like bits and pieces throughout this movie visually of implying this relationship that the engineers have to the xenomorph or to like what the black goo is, and then when the answers is ultimately like nobody cares, run from the thing.
Well,
it
remember
leaves you just being like, oh,
I remember when we saw this, just sitting in the theater, and when the movie opened with the engineer drinking the poison, the black goo that killed him, and just being like, okay, this is not the movie I thought I was. What? Okay.
Yeah.
Because you're just like, wait, what?
I think that opening scene shouldn't be in the movie.
I don't know that it matters.
Well, because it introduces this idea that the engineers like seeded life on Earth, right?
Yes.
Or it reinforces that idea for the viewer specifically, because it's not like that scene gets any sort of lip service later in the movie, other than eventually we sort of imply, or don't imply, we prove that the engineers and humans have basically the same DNA.
Right, and I kind of want it to feel like, well, they probably did. I still like the idea that's like, because that would be the more, by showing us that, it's like, boom, we came from the engineers. But where did they come from? I don't care.
And this movie kind of posits that they're using the black goo to like mess with DNA across the board, right?
Right.
Because we see that first engineer slurp the black goo, turns into bits and pieces and falls into the water and introduces DNA into a primeval Earth, I guess.
Yes, that's the idea.
Which then implies that all of evolution of life on Earth stems from engineers. And again, this is the insanity you have to deal with if you're dealing with Chariot of the Gods type stuff, is the rise and fall of all life on Earth was meant to coalesce in the form of upright, two-legged ape descendants that look and sound like humans, because that's what the engineers look like.
Right.
Let's ignore all of the trilobites and bugs and fish and dinosaurs that had to happen in between the two.
I shudder to bring this up, but do you remember the Star Trek episode that kind of does the same thing?
Oh, yeah, I know.
Which is one of those things where it's like, I love when things like that, where it's like, we need to explain why most of the aliens are humanoid. I'm like, you don't. You just don't.
What are they called in Star Trek? The precursors?
Something like that, yeah.
Or is that a thing from Halo? I don't know. There's a lot of ancient alien bullshit in a lot of franchises.
They may be called like the ancestors or something like that. And
I don't know. The last season of Discovery looped back around to that
and they
crap.
shouldn't, because that's a thing I think is best left forgotten. That's a really weird episode of Next Generation, and it's sort of this, but it's also a sort of thing where you're like, oh, it doesn't matter though. You mean like it doesn't? It's not like that plays into storylines going later. It's like the Klingons are suddenly like, we are born of the same thing as you. It doesn't matter because it's just a weird thing. I mean, they were just filling time on the show back then. You know. But
you think the Romulans care that? I mean, we already know the Romulans and the Vulcans are of the same stock,
and they have an enslaved race. We'll find out later, which are the Remans. So they don't. Give a shit.
Boy, Remans! Ugh, they're so gooey.
Yeah, leave them on the dark side of the planet. Let them mine for us. Until Tom Hardy shows up.
I love there's a bit from Lower Decks like, oh, I've got Reman blood on my tunic. Oh, I can never get this stuff out.
Yeah. Once again, stay tuned for that IP Squad season about the Star Trek movies, and you'll also hear my I will die on the hill of Star Trek nemesis. Let's see. Anything before I get to some other thoughts on?
Yeah, I mean, my big takeaway from this movie is Ridley Scott had a lot of big ideas that he was kind of entranced by. And so trying to get them all into a movie is about as good of a reason to make a movie as any, I suppose. But then trying to fuse that into an Alien prequel is where things start to fall apart for me. And clearly he has a different agenda than what a like mass market studio has. And so like to get the money to make the movie he wants to make, it has to be an Alien movie. But inherently the movie he wants to make is divorced in some way from the greater horror of the Alien franchise, and invested in these like creatures that are this nihilistic endpoint of life, right?
Right, which is weird to then go make a movie about the beginnings of life with them, kind of.
But also this movie implies, because you mentioned the Deacon earlier, and how that's literally the last image we see in the movie is, oh, by the way, here's something that sort of, at least in outline, vaguely looks like the xenomorph you know and love from these other movies.
And that's it exactly, right? Is you just go like, see, Alien.
Right.
That's what that last moment feels like. Because you're like, that doesn't have anything to do with the plot of this movie, really.
No, the plot has driven away from this corpse that's exploding.
Yeah. And then, next week we'll talk even more deeply about what happens when you compromise that even more.
Sure.
But, an interesting thing, as always, if there is, I say this, we check in with what did, in my opinion, the all-time greatest film critic Roger Ebert have to say about this movie.
Oh, boy.
He loved it. 4 stars.
Oh, okay.
A masterpiece. Ridley Scott's Prometheus is a magnificent science fiction film, all the more intriguing because it raises questions about the origin of human life and doesn't have the answers.
That's the pull quote.
That's the first line of his review. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, look, if you want something that you can just like meditate on and like raises these big questions, and like you're not looking for answers and you just want a philosophical like bullet point of what are these things I could think about while high on mushrooms.
But the thing is,
I guess
we're fairly big science fiction fans. There are many other things that raise questions like this that are better movies or books.
Yeah.
These are not new concepts in science fiction by any means. And this movie, just isn't very entertaining.
That's maybe its biggest sin, right? Because like, what are we looking for out of sitting down to watch a 2-hour movie?
And once again,
that
doesn't mean it has to be a roller coaster ride, but like, it just never intrigued me or thrilled me, or I just don't. I watch this and kind of go like, okay. Like it has the key sin of being boring for a lot of it.
The spectacle it's presenting is philosophical, not visual.
Even though there are great visuals in it, but they just don't amount to much.
Yeah.
I think if
it's a pretty good art book.
Oh yeah, I'm sure. Actually, yeah, like the concept art of Prometheus is probably a killer coffee table book. I'm serious.
Yeah.
But I think the thing you were talking about, had this not been an alien thing, had this just been Prometheus, and honestly, if you change Wayland's name and get rid of the thing at the end, it almost is.
You have to divorce the imagery of the space jockey.
The image of the space jockey, yeah, I mean, a couple of the designs, change up the robot a little bit, because, I mean, obviously, once his head is torn off and you get the milky blood. But, like, minus a couple designs and some names, you could basically make this movie. And here's where I'm going with that. I think it still wouldn't work, but I think it would be remembered as, like, oh, that was an interesting misfire for Ridley Scott. He was trying to do something, it didn't work, but that was an interesting movie. You know, it would be remembered as like a passion project that didn't quite work out.
Yeah.
As opposed to the massive disappointment people had going in and going, finally, the master of the Alien franchise is back to save it.
It would be his Tintin.
Yeah. Yeah, a little bit. A little bit, yeah, where you're just like, I see what you were doing, man, but you're more interested in this than I am.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I see tons of movies like that. You know, filmmakers get power, and you're just going like, dude, I all the passion is there. This is not, I mean, because this is not a checked out, you know, older auteur being like, whatever, let me take some money. He's really trying to make something here, and he's got a lot on his mind.
Well, and as we've talked about, he's clearly had this on his mind for like 10 plus years in the production of this.
Oh, it's crazy.
Like, I was reading.
He was working on
the development of this movie starts in like 2002. Ridley Scott like talks about coming back to the franchise.
Yeah. And he had at least posited this idea in the early 90s when Alien 3 was happening, we know. So
yeah.
But the thing also about Ridley Scott is the guy works. So he's right on to something else after. You know, he's made so many movies after this. It doesn't, you know, this whatever. He's just like, all right, I'm on to the next thing.
It's a hiccup, but it's not going to derail him by any means.
Nothing will. That's the thing about Ridley Scott. I mean, the guy's directed 53 movies. That's a lot. That's a lot of films.
You know what actually raised like a lot of these same questions, and as I think like a better product all told. Did you watch the show Raised by Wolves at all?
Yeah, and that was also from Ridley Scott.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So it's like he's clearly never given up on some of these ideas about like humanity and like being brought up to be the creation of some greater power.
I mean, it's honestly Blade Runner asked those questions.
Yeah.
Better in a way, right? Through the story of the robots. Yeah, Raised by Wolves was great, and also similar to this, gorgeous, stunning. I mean, the guy's never made a bad looking movie. That's his gift. I mean, he is such a gifted visual filmmaker.
I don't think I watched any of the second season of this show. Now that
I did, I think I canceled, unfortunately. And as of the recording of this, I have yet to see Gladiator 2, though I'm going in a couple days. So I'm excited to see that.
Cool.
You know, and I mean, to wrap this all up, I love Ridley Scott. He's one of my favorite filmmakers. He's a big reason. He's like a big, you know, early director I knew, and, you know, a big part of the reason I love movies so much. So,
totally.
But the guy is also just like we talked about. He's a guy who just loves the job. So some of these aren't going to work, and he's just like, that's fine. Because in a couple of years, he makes The Martian, which is an amazing sci-fi movie.
Right. And like for every The Martian I really liked, House of Gucci, yeah, it was okay.
Yeah, House of Gucci's a little long, but I did like The Last Duel.
Last Duel was great. Napoleon, also a little long.
Yeah. But couple astounding battle sequences in it, because the guy knows how to put that on film. So let's talk briefly about the box office of this. As I said, 2012, the movie made, what did I say it made? 403.3 million. Where do you think that landed in the top 200?
Okay. 2012, so number one movie of the year is Avengers.
Here's a crazy thing about 2012. The top 4 movies all made over $1 billion. This was the box office was booming. This is what they're trying to get back to. I don't think
that's never going to happen.
No. Four movies made over $1 billion.
2012. What else made over $1 billion?
Number 2, Skyfall.
Mm-hmm. Oh, okay. Yep.
Number
Man,
3,
2012 was a great year for movies.
well, it's gonna be a little bit less as we go down these. Number 3, The Dark Knight Rises.
Okay.
Number 4, The Hobbit: An Unexpected Journey.
Well, look, it started promisingly enough.
No, I'm not surprised the first Hobbit made $1 billion. Number 5, this really takes you back. Ice Age Continental Drift.
Hey, all right. Okay, so if those are our top 5,
Those are your
I'm going
top
to say
5.
Prometheus, number 14.
Ooh, pretty close. 17.
Okay.
Number
I
17,
feel good about that.
just after Django Unchained and just before Snow White and the Huntsman.
Ooh, Snow White and the Huntsman.
Yeah. That
The
movie's...
franchise that real wasn't.
Yeah, talk about a thing where they... But that made almost $400 million. Which
Snow
is
White and the Huntsman did?
crazy to think about. Well, because they made the sequel.
Yet another sequel in which like the main female lead does not return, but they make the more captivating male performance.
Well, because I
the
think
lead
it was
of
the thing
second
where the movie did okay and everybody kind of liked Hemsworth in it, so they're like, just make it just the Huntsman. But then people didn't really want to see that. Not really.
Right.
Also,
But we like him as Thor. Let's just keep him there.
Interesting. Number 28 that year was previous episode of the IP Squad, John Carter.
28. That's actually way higher than I thought it would be.
The thing is, it made $284.1 million, but it cost like $300 million.
Right. Yeah.
That's the thing. Is like most other movies would have turned that around. That thing just they just spent too much money. And you can go back and listen to the argument we had about whether or not they should have that I had with Brendan Jones on that past episode.
The answer is no.
No, yeah, and that's I think he took it to be like that. I don't. It's like no, I like John Carter. It's just what were they thinking? In what world was that going to be the biggest? I mean, that would have had to have been the biggest movie of all time to make.
And in a year where it was up against the Avengers.
Yeah, I mean that. It's very interesting that like a couple months after John Carter came out, Disney bought Star Wars. It was like we
We
come
need a
up with
space
stuff
thing.
on our own.
Yeah.
Let's just get somebody else. All right, let's finish up here with some highs and lows. This comes to us from BJ Bat IMDb, who titles their review "Where No Idiot Has Gone Before."
I think I know where this is going.
Prometheus is the story of a $1 trillion mission to discover the origins of human life on a distant planet. Basically, this is supposed to be the greatest exploration undertaken in the history of mankind. So who did they send? A gaggle of fractious goons whose collective scientific knowledge is rivaled only by that of the Three Stooges. Within minutes of touching down, conveniently beside the only man-made structures on the planet, a la 1960s Star Trek, the scientists are yanking off their helmets on the basis of, it seems fine to me, dipping their fingers into strange organic ooze and lugging a severed alien head back to an unquarantined spaceship in a sandwich bag. Once there, they speedily discover the meaning of life. Then, while one of them gets a bit drunk, his two female companions decide it would be useful to stimulate the head electrically to reanimate it. They don't say why. They give it way too much juice, then too little, then dither over too much or too little, like a couple of schoolgirls fiddling with a Bunsen burner, while the most important scientific discovery in human history waggles its ears and rolls its eyes before eventually blowing up like a frog in a microwave. Are the scientists abashed? Is the man angry? Do they all calm down and remember they have degrees in clever things, not diplomas in macrame? Do they? Heck. The whole movie is a litany of ludicrous so-called science, schoolboy errors, and pseudo-profundity about the origin of species. Ironic, really, when none of the crew would have a chance in hell in any sort of contest governed by Darwinian rules. Crass stupidity is rampant in every department. High-tech helmets record every heartbeat, apparently, until anything worth recording happens. Stranded crewmates are abandoned to their fate in favor of a quick shag, and the spaceship door is open to anyone who comes a-knocking. Although after hitting the welcome button, Idris Elba does do a double take and go, hold on a second. But that might have just been an involuntary ad-lib at his own character's baffling idiocy. There's spectacular cinematography and effects, but not one iota of originality has been squandered on plot, subtext, tension, or characters, which are as shallow as the Prometheus' muddy little gene pool. Ridley Scott is a hero of mine, but Prometheus is not the intelligent, emotionally satisfying prequel that Alien deserves. It is an empty experience, and anyone who loved Alien is surely too old and too smart to be fobbed off with something this bad because it's shiny. 1 out of 10 stars. I think most of that's pretty fair.
Yeah.
I actually, yeah.
I'd forgotten about them reanimating the head. Why did they do that?
Science?
Oh, okay. Yeah, fair enough.
I don't know. Yeah, why not? No.
Yeah, I believe her line in that scene is just, I think I can trick the brain into thinking it's still alive.
It is her line, exactly, yeah. I mean, that's back in a fucking Hammer Frankenstein movie at that point. I know that.
Also, again, she's an anthropologist.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. No, some of the characters have clearly defined scientific knowledge. Other characters are just science people.
Well, yeah, they're like comic book super scientists. Like, what do they do? Well, science.
Yeah, because the only people I know for sure are the geologist and the xenobiologist.
It's always so unclear to me in the Alien franchise just how much alien life humanity
That's
has
long
encountered.
been a thing, right? It's like the idea that the xenomorphs are a new discovery, but like, are aliens a thing? I mean, I think that might be something that the new show can get into.
Yeah, we'll see.
Anyway, here we go.
Who thought this movie was brilliant?
Well, I'll tell you right now, it's J.M. Parkin who titles their review, IMDb members, you're such a jaded lot. These are my favorite reviews, when it's a chiding of the other people on IMDb. That's the title. So you're such a jaded lot. Where's your sense of wonder, adventure, excitement, innocence? I feel I have to respond to the deluge of haters on IMDb for this film. And no, I'm not trolling. I genuinely loved this film and find no fault with it whatsoever. I can't believe such negative opinion and vitriol for this film. I've read and reread the same criticisms over and over again, and for me, they don't hold water. It looks like 99.9% of people have made up their minds, but here's my thoughts on the film. And if you'll indulge me, I'd like to try and change the world. Strap in, all right?
Sorry, does it say that word for word?
I'd like to try and change the world. That's exact. I'm reading that verbatim.
Godspeed, you fancy bastard.
Well, here we go. Strap in, because there's an essay that follows.
Oh,
the Prometheus mission is classified top secret. Even the development of the ship would be done without publicity of any kind. Potentially, they are on to the discovery of a lifetime, like Howard Carter didn't broadcast to his competitors that he was going looking for Tutankhamun and where he was going to go look for it. Weyland would not risk allowing their main rival, Yutani, to get there first. The Magic Eye viral posted prior to the film's release supports this and suggests that Yutani are constantly using covert means to spy on their competitor. By the way, I just got to pull out of the review for a second. I love that they're really like, if you had paid attention to the featurettes they released online, you would see that there's a corporate war going on.
In the ARG that was going on simultaneous to the film.
You're telling me you're not reading the comics and watching all the YouTube content? Boy, are you even caring about this movie? That's not a good defense of a movie, by the way. So as well as this mission being secret, the crew of scientists would not be briefed on mission specifics beforehand or introduced to each other prior to the mission in order to maintain secrecy. Consequently, Weyland would probably not go directly to the scientific community, but rather hire people who could be sworn to secrecy and their silence bought. Fifield's attitude confirms this. Remember, the scientific mission is only a smokescreen. The mission is primarily to extend Weyland's life. Period. Science is secondary. It's just that Shaw and Holloway don't know that. That's why the scientists are such a motley crew. Even beyond Weyland's motives, this is a commercial venture first and foremost. Vickers pretty much spells this out to Shaw and Holloway. In no particular order, the nature of panic. When Vickers and Shaw are fleeing the Juggernaut, they are in blind panic, like when you are running away from a foe and likely run straight towards it. They don't have time to look at the orientation. They see the thing falling, see the huge shadow. Remember, the Juggernaut is B-I-G. It is all caps in their space, so it is B-I-G, exclamation point, and blindly run. Even if they ran to the side, the thing is falling heavily. They still might not get out of the way because it's the size of 2 football fields. Modern instrumentation in the 21st century.
And how did Shaw get away? Anyway.
Yeah. You should still have enough time to... It's not falling that fast either. Like, not really. They could still have been like, oh, it's falling this way, go that way. Anyway, modern instrumentation in the 21st century, when everyone takes their helmets off, they have a lot of correlating info to support the absence of pathogens and the presence of oxygen. That's how airline pilots don't need to see out the windows to fly the plane. You rely on your instruments, all caps, 2 exclamation points. So they know they can safely remove their helmets because the area has been terraformed using engineered technology. Same thing with the head. The instruments indicate no pathogens, and the reanimating procedure would have been successful, but unbeknownst to Shaw and Ford, it's the presence of the mutation that causes the head to be in distress, and molecular implosion is the result. I want every one of these paragraphs to end with, you idiots. The Pauling Medipod is expensive for a reason. Don't compare it to a human surgeon, as well as the cutting being ultra-fine and precise. Besides the staples, the machine sprays several fast-healing, flesh-bonding chemicals into the wound. Shaw does stagger for a few hours, but you're up and walking in a matter of hours. I just love that, too. I love the idea that's like, this is how that thing works, you idiots.
I mean, look, if you really want to get nitpicky, you could start complaining about like the med tech in this movie. Obviously, those aren't our biggest complaints, but I'm sure that's something people have brought.
Ridley decided to use. I just love it. It's point by point. I'm addressing all the criticism. Ridley decided to use Guy Pearce in old man makeup rather than hire an old actor in order to maintain continuity with the TED Talk viral. Once again, why aren't you watching the YouTube channel? Everyone says how terrible the makeup is, but I think it's because Wayland is very old, so his appearance would be that more exaggerated. It's as good as, but I think most old age makeup is terrible. I don't think there's anything uniquely terrible about this, is my opinion.
Yeah, the problem with all old age makeup is that like you can't, what you're doing is adding to the person's face, and that inherently detracts from what actually happens when you get old, which is your skin like shrinks against your bone structure.
Yeah,
right.
That was the big thing Jack Pearce did when he did the Frankenstein monster, is he was trying to find ways to pull in Karloff's face and sink it in so that he looks more emaciated. Anyway, when Milburn pets the snake, he's frightened to death. An analogy would be like when you chance upon a Doberman. You might say outstretch your hands, say, nice doggy. Fruitless, but you're trying to handle a difficult situation under extreme duress. And this business with accelerated growth, in the original Alien, accelerated growth is shown right from the alien birthing from John Hurt. A few hours later, it's the size of a man. So it follows that the progenitors have this same characteristic. It's also possible the black goo causes this acceleration/mutation. And David's motives are, for the most part, not ambiguous, but rather pretty clear. He is first and foremost programmed to work towards the objective of Peter Weyland. All of the considerations are secondary. His deliberate poisoning of Holloway is to use him as a guinea pig to observe the effects of the black goo before he advises Weyland on whether or not to ingest it, what exposure it does, etc. And the Pauling Medpod is programmed back to the
Wait, hold on. Was David's motivation in the film like part of people's complaints about the movie? I don't remember that from like reading people's complaints about the film. That always was clear to me.
Yeah, I know. What they described here is what I thought as well.
All right. Anyway.
Yeah, I have no idea. Anyway.
How much more of there is this? I get it, John. He's going point by point.
There's a couple more paragraphs. All right, but it's almost over. The Pauling Medpod is programmed for the one person on the ship who might need a heart-out bypass. This person is likely to be old. There's only one person who fits the bill, and he's male, so it's obvious the unit is set up for Weyland. The notion that it's for Vickers is laughable. She's shown to be tip-top fit with the push-ups. It just happens to be located in her room. I think Weyland is on Prometheus in secret because no one would insure a man of his age and condition to go into space. In fact, the shareholders would probably forbid it. He would never pass the medical. So the only solution would be to go there in secret. 99.9% of people, using that again, wanted a retread of Alien. I didn't, so I wasn't disappointed. And for those of you that want to bash Lindelof, read John Spaeth's original script. Everything that you blame Lindelof for is in Spaeth's original script. 10 out of 10 stars.
Is it, though?
I mean, a lot of broad strokes plot sort of stuff is still in Spaeth's script, and that's obviously why you got credit. But a lot of the finer details come from Lindelof, and really through Scott, through Lindelof from Scott via Lindelof.
Sure, because Ridley Scott was dictating a lot of the rewrites.
This was not like the Damon Lindelof vision. This was Damon Lindelof brought in to massage it more towards what Ridley Scott wanted to do. Sure. Anyway, and I think, It's not a disaster, but it is a disappointment. I think disappointment is a fair. This should be better.
Yeah, I mean, it's got a 7.0 on IMDb in terms of rating. Its Metacritic score is 64, which I think is about right.
Yeah. It just left you.
It's not unwatchable.
No.
It's dull in places, and like I think its ideas are messy and mishandled. I think it's a bad like piece of the Alien franchise, but like I think it's better than like I don't know. How do you stack this against like Alien 3 or Resurrect?
I'd rather watch this than Alien 3, so because I find Alien 3 a real slog. Resurrection's more fun.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that's correct for me as well.
Resurrection is certainly would be the one I would be more likely to rewatch. I don't like. I'm bashing my head against a wall watching Alien 3. I'm not doing that
Sure.
here. And in my recounting, and I haven't seen Covenant, but for next week we'll be watching Alien Covenant. I think I like this more than Covenant. I think Covenant was this, but dumber. Even
Again, only seen Covenant once.
Me
Saw
too.
it streaming. Maybe wasn't paying the closest attention.
I saw it in the
and I was
theater.
extremely dismissive of it afterwards.
I saw it in the theater, and kind of similar. I had a very muted reaction to it. And I also remember like the seams really showing. We were like, okay, that's a scene Ridley wanted. That's a scene the studio made him put in. That's a scene Ridley wanted. That's you can really feel like two movies fighting each other. There's stuff in it that's good. It has once again has really good actors. But we'll talk about that next week. But of course, the tagline for that is, where's the tagline for it?
Oh no, it has no tagline. It just says it's a sequel.
Pretty good tagline again. The path to paradise begins in hell. That's not bad.
But hold on, no, what? That doesn't.
The path to paradise begins in hell.
I guess the whole plot of that movie is that the crew of the Covenant is like trying to establish a new colony, right?
Yeah, because which I kind of like the idea. It's all couples on the ship, and so they're basically being sent somewhere to create an idyllic commune on a planet somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
So that's
okay.
Yeah. The other one that they used a lot, and I do remember this, was discover the origin of terror.
Sure, that's every horror prequel ever has that tagline.
Yeah. So we'll talk about that next week. But of course, if you want more from us and all the shows on the Punch Up Entertainment Network, you want to head over to our Patreon page, which is patreon.com/punchupent. That's punchupent. Like I said, you get bonus episodes of this show, plus all the shows on the Punch Up Entertainment Network, including Material Components, Campbell and Jones Meet the Monsters, all that fun stuff. Additional shows that are only available to patrons, like Price is Right, and the just beginning Peter Cushing celebration called Peter Crushing.
You can also find all the IP Squad related cases over there, including our discussions of let's call them loving homages, maybe knockoffs of the Alien and Predator franchises.
Depends on the movie. Some homages, some ripoffs. Where else can people check us out, though, Gergani?
YouTube, I think. Yeah, still YouTube exists, right? I don't know. Maybe it's been mutated into something evil, and due to podcast time travel, we just haven't seen it yet.
It drank the black goo.
It drank the black goo. But yes, over on youtube.com/@punchupentertainment, you can find all of those shows we were just talking about, as well as some of our YouTube exclusive shows, including, well, it's not YouTube exclusive, but the best way to watch May the Panel Be With You is over on our YouTube page, where you can see the comic book along with us. You can go see Elliot Lewis and I playing some Mass Effect. We talk about big, heady sci-fi franchises that ask a lot of like interesting questions about the nature of like intelligence and like the creation of life. I think Mass Effect does that way better than this movie.
Unquestionably.
And we, actually, pretty recently, I think, as of you hearing this show, there might have been some episodes recently where we start putting some of that together over on the old Mass Effect franchise. So go check out Punch Up Plays.
At this point, I hope it's not a mystery to our listeners that these are recorded in advance of them coming out. So sometimes we don't fully know what's coming out when and how stuff is lining up.
As a shorthand, we call it podcast time travel.
We sure do, yeah. So that's why sometimes you'll hear Brendan Jones and I excited about a movie on Meet the Monsters when it came out a year ago. But I think that will do it. Until next week, the case file is closed.